Alright, let's go over Chapter 10 once again. I'm referencing an online video by Brad Traversy, CSS Grid Layout Crash Course. So one of them is 25 minutes, this one's closer to 30. And here's the code that he put in it, so I'm not going to say anything more. Again, there is the CSS Grid Garden. Talked about this before. Yesterday you looked at the Flexbox Froggy. This is the Grid Garden. I'd suggest you go over it. If you don't want to, then you don't want to. Alright? Alright, so I also sent you this that just said, hey, for the next test, you might want to have these 4 things up on your system. So when you look, this is what they are. This is the W3 Schools page for Flexbox. Notice with Flexbox, most everything is the same size. So that's that page. This is the Traversy video on Flexbox. Now look at how different it looks, because this is what we're talking about today. My guess, I'm just basically giving out the tests. I make modifications to them, but we're going to be using the ones that have been created already. I'm not going to be surprised if for your next test, either you are asked to take one page and make it look more like this, all right, and the other page to make it look more like it's Flexbox, or they'll say, you know, just basically make 2 more sites, not another site for your portfolio, but just 2 little mini sites that do this. All right, that's my guess. So again, I sent you all that stuff. You've got it now. All right. So let's take a look at what's actually in Chapter 10. Oh, before we do, one last thing, just so you see it. I had sent, you'll notice that our tutor is not here. So I sent this out to Keith Morton, who's basically the head of the tutors. And I said, hey, it's 20 hours per week to max Luke can tutor. And he wrote back with nothing. Okay? I mean, he's a busy guy. I understand that. So I wrote back again, said, as I've heard nothing from you, I'm assuming it's okay for Luke to work a max of 20 hours a week, dividing his time between tutoring you guys and tutoring the second-year people. Okay? I sent that out yesterday. And when I said this, I don't ever want it to come off like, you know, you should have emailed me and you didn't. But maybe it did, because he just got back to me. Oops. He just got back to me and he said, and he didn't sound mad either. So, hi Jeff, I've been conferring with my supervisor, who is one of the vice presidents. From an HR perspective, student workers are limited to 29 hours per week. However, student success is not budgeted for department tutors to be regularly working 20+ hours. We want to ensure all student needs are met, but we will be exploring the most efficient method of doing so. I don't know what that means. But I'm just going to tell them to plan on working 20 hours a week. All right, that's what I'm going to tell them. And if they come back and say, no, he can't do that, I don't understand why. All right, that's saying 10 hours a week with each program. The programs, you know, that means what? That he's with you guys half the time you're here, basically. Right? But we'll see what they say. I have no control over that stuff. You probably already knew that. But the other thing is, and again, I'm putting this up there. I'm going to say this to the second-year people too. If you have any interest in getting involved in student government, let me know. If you don't, not a problem. But I'm going to say this, they're looking really for second-year people, but they want a representative from each program. Well, when I brought it up to the second-year people, no one jumped at the chance, you know. And a lot of those people work, and they come right to school in the afternoon from work. But if you think that you might be interested, just let me know. If you say, well, I don't know anything about it, they're having a meeting a week from yesterday, October 3rd at noon. Right there. So you could sit in on it. And if you say, well, I'll sit in on it, but I'm not saying I'm going to volunteer, you don't have to. you can sit in on it and see what they do. All right, so if you think you might be interested, just email me. All right, so that said, let's go into Chapter 10. So I am on page 351. All right. Again, the last chapter that we looked at was grid layout. I'm sorry, the last chapter we looked at was Flexbox. This one's grid layout. If you look up on the screen here, this is, I'm going to actually turn this off for just a now, maybe. But it's hard for you to read, I understand that. But just so you know what's coming up, next week we're going over chapters 11 and 12. You with me? We're going over chapters 11 and 12. The following week, not next week, but the following week, we'll have a test on 9, 10, 11, and 12. Probably that Monday, but I'm not sure. That week we're going to go over 13 and 14. The next week we're going over 15 and 16. Plus we're going to spend 2 days talking about Bootstrap. The point is this, 10/22, which is about 3 weeks from Tuesday, all right, on that day, this book goes bye-bye and we start on the other book. That's day 41. Literally, you get 40 days of this, 40 days of JavaScript. All right, just so you know what's going on. All right. Many people think that grid layout is easier to use than Flexbox that we talked about yesterday, because with grid layout, you can make stuff of different sizes much easier. Okay, so they like that better. Not everybody feels that way. Some people love Flexbox. Some people hate Flexbox. Some people love grid layout. Some people hate grid layout. Again, what you will be asked to do on your next test is to either to get rid of all the floating on the pages that you have right now on your portfolio site and replace them with Flexbox or grid layout, or you're going to have to create something new that will not use floating and will use Flexbox and grid layout. Does that make sense to everybody? All right. So they show an example of this on page 353. Pretty ugly. All right. You'll notice here we've got 16 squares that are all the same size, but they don't have to be. In other words, we could decide that right here, that was one square. All right, totally legit to do that when you're working with a grid layout. So it says the grid consists of a grid container, which is rows and columns. Am I right in assuming that all of you in here either have worked with a spreadsheet before or know what a spreadsheet is? Is that fair to assume? All right, that's basically when you look at it, isn't that what this is? But what we're saying is it's a grid system just like a spreadsheet, but you've got control over how wide or how narrow each one of the grid elements are. All right? And that's what they're saying in here. So it says the grid is the container, the track is a column or a row, the lines that are in here are the grid lines, the separators, the cell is like that's a cell, that's a cell, that's a cell, etc. And an area is a rectangular area of one or more cells. For example, that one. All right. The browser support on this is good. Again, I was going to do this. I did it yesterday, I know. But I can always go out to caniuse.com and come out here and say CSS grid layout. Now, if you remember when we looked yesterday at Flexbox, it was almost all red, wasn't it? This is not nearly the same thing. These are all older versions that are red. I mean, look, 6 through 9 of IE. Now, you might laugh at that and say, well, who uses that? There are still people that do. And by and large, what you'll find a lot of times is they're older people, all right, because they just don't want to change. Something works. Younger people have a tendency to jump on things. Now, I don't know about you, and I don't know what iPhone you have. It's none of my business. But my daughters, my oldest daughter came over to the house the other day, and my middle daughter said, "What?" She goes, "What do you mean?" She goes, "You got a new iPhone?" Because they just came out, and so of course she needed one. All right. But if you're working with the latest and greatest, you should have nothing to worry about, period. All right. So they define it as a two-dimensional layout in CSS3 that allows you to lay out web pages. Again, is that important? Not at all. It really and truly isn't important at all. All right. But what is important is that you're able to lay stuff out on the screen. And I don't know if you looked at that Flexbox Froggy. You tried doing anything with it. And today, if you look at the other one, they're not going to make you experts. But you can at least tell. I mean, if you put something in there that basically tells you to move it all the way to the right, and then you're asked to do the same thing on a test, then you should remember how to do it. Okay? So these are the different properties that you can have. I'm not going to run through any of them. I don't want to read them to you. But this is how you end up using it. And you, of course, can combine this. So this is the definition I've used. Not everybody likes it. But like I said, it's like you have a spreadsheet, but you get to define how big each cell is. All right? And basically set it up any way you want to. All right, you're going to see that especially later on in the chapter. Now, unfortunately, some of the examples they've shown here are like this, where everything's the same size. So it looks a lot like the one we did yesterday. All right, but the idea is with Flex that we used yesterday, typically everything is the same size. It didn't have to be. If you remember, we put that number on it, we could make one column bigger than the other. But this literally is designed for much, let's just say maybe more artistic type of a layout. So to define the rows and columns in a grid, you code one value for each row and column. You separate them with spaces. If you use a template, you can use a / between them. So there's the template. By default, they're laid out left to right and top to bottom. You can change that if you want to. And, you might say, why would I ever want to change it from, instead of making it left to right, why would I want to make it right to left? Because in some countries, they read from right to left. All right, not in this country, but in some countries they do. All right. When you work on this, notice there's a new unit of measure, FR, which stands for fraction. Okay? As it says, it represents a fraction of the available space in the container. You use this when building fluid grid layouts. You now know what fluid is. All right? And you can tell it, I want this fraction to basically repeat, or I want to be able to set up minimums and maximums. And they show you a repeat example here, and you'll notice they're the same size. And then they show you an example here that mixes. All right? And when you do this, okay, what I want is for this to make sense to you. And what I'm saying is there's nothing to stop me from having the first row of stuff that I have on my webpage look like this when they're all uniform. Then the next row could look like this when they're not. Then the next row, they could be uniform again, then not. Does that make sense? So how you lay stuff out is totally up to you. Here's another example. So you can set it up in a lot of different ways. That's the bottom line. I don't know any other way or any better way to say it than that. Now notice Autofit and Min Max. Well, with Autofit, we got 360 pixels. Okay? And you'll notice we have 6 divs. That's not big enough. All right? So it'll auto-fit as many as it can on the first row, then it'll automatically wrap for you. Now when you double it, of course, you've got plenty of room. And they show you again how you can set that stuff up. All right? So as mentioned here on the bottom of page 359, you can define the size of a grid track using any measure. You can use pixels and points, not typically recommended. It's typically recommended you use percentages, M's and Rems, so they are fluid. All right, you can also use the fraction, as they mentioned. Min-max, as it says, is typically used within the track list when you're using repeats. When you use Autofit, it'll put as many items in the space as it can. As far as aligning this stuff, well, I mean, something's either right aligned, center aligned, or left aligned, basically. All right? And that's what they're talking about in here, too. But you can try to justify stuff. So when it's in its own little area, its own cell, you can set up the way that it's put in there. All right? So you can set it up horizontally. You can set it up vertically. And what I like about this book is after they show that, they show commonly the kind of way that you'd set it up. All right? So you can get, like I said, I've actually put a marker on this page. I wouldn't be surprised if this is what they ask you to do for one of the pages. You might want to dog-ear that page in your book. It's 303. But you have your logo, your navigation, your image. Doesn't that pretty much look like what you've got so far? It does to me. But that is set up, as it says there, it's set up using alignment, and it's set up using a grid layout. All right, so again, the code for that is on page 303. That would be one I'd say that you might want to make sure you at least take a look at before your next test. All right, so how to define the grid areas here. I'm on page 364. All right, it says when you define a grid using template rows, columns, and properties, each line is assigned a numeric value. Okay? And it's kind of cool because they show you this, then they explain what everything is down here. So again, when you look at this, you'll notice that row 1 is narrower than, not as tall as row 2. They're all the same width, but they don't necessarily have to be. And that's what I think the author keeps trying to get across in here. All right? So when you define a grid, each thing in the grid has a numeric value. You can use these, as it says, to identify rows and columns. So you can be as meticulous in here as you want as far as setting things up. And that's the key to it is you've got control over the way you want it to look. All right? Not only that, as it says there, you can name the lines. And they show this, and then they show how you use that in the code that's here. So it says to name the lines in the grid, you code the name or names of each line in brackets. Right there. So there's grid template rows. There's the brackets. To identify rows and columns for a grid area, you code the line names on the grid row and the column and the grid column properties, like we have in here. All right. So, how to use the template areas. Again, the idea is you're able to create something that looks more the way you want it to look. All right. So as it says, there's grid template areas and grid property areas. So you can define a piece of a page to look the way you want it to look. Again, CSS example in there. All right. How to use the 12-column grid concept. Why is this important? Because we're going to talk in a couple weeks from now, we're going to spend 2 days talking about Bootstrap. We're going to create, you guys with me, we're going to create a page. And I'll even show you, that maybe I've already shown you this, I don't know, but I'm going to show it to you again anyway. That's the Warrenton one. I had a one before that too. right, we're going to create something that looks like this. My image is missing here. I don't know why. But we're going to create this. Notice it's got a built-in slideshow. Looks nice as it goes across. All right. We're going to create this. I'm going to give you the code. We're going to do it as a class. All right. The reason I told you that is Bootstrap uses what's called a 12-column grid concept. It imagines no matter how big or small your screen is, it's 12 columns. All right, and that's how you set everything up. So that's kind of the author's intro into here. So there's 12 columns with one thing having all 12 columns. Here's another one with one is 4 columns and one is 8, but 4 plus 8 is 12. Here's one with nothing here, 4 and 4. So a blank 4, then 4, it's still 12. You get the idea. And you can set it up like that. Again, should you set it up like that? It depends on what it is. If you're doing a job for somebody, what they want it to look like. So the author ends by going pretty much through the same thing we looked at in the last chapter, but this time he builds it using grid layout, whereas in the last one he used Flexbox. Make sense? And he shows you the HTML, and he shows you the CSS. And then on 380, here's the CSS that you can use with a 12-column grid. All right? The stuff that we do with Bootstrap, no, it's not going to, it'll be much easier than that, to be honest with you. All right? So when you look, and you look here on 383, here's some examples of things you could build. You might be asked to make this one for the test. All right? Or that one. Or that one. I don't know. All right? Now that's pretty much it, but there's 2 things I wanted to say before we finish up, and we're done for the day. But the first one, because I didn't do this yesterday, shame on me. All right? So for Chapter 9, for Shape Up, what do we want to do? Flexible box layout. You'll create a strength training page and you'll use Flexbox to format. So it should look like this, but it should have no floating. All right? Looks very similar to other types of pages you've already created. No. What you could have done is you could have said float left here. And then this stuff would have automatically floated to the right. All right, but we're not going to have any floats. Again, notice there's enough steps in here. All right? So they tell you what to do, and then they tell you how to start modifying it. All right? Then, for Chapter 10, you're going to do a very similar type of thing. But if you noticed, for Chapter 9, the page was strength training. For Chapter 10, it's stress relief. This looks very similar to the one we just looked at for strength training. But the last one used Flexbox. This one uses grid layout. If you can do these, you should have no problem doing it on the test, because you're going to be doing the same thing. All right. And then finally, for the Halloween one, much of the same. So for Chapter 9, again, you'll create a page that lists the products using Flexbox layout. Not this so much. Oh, I guess that is it. So that'll be the page. And over here, so when you click the product list, that's what'll come up. But it's not that different from the last one. You've got something to the left, and everything else is towards the right, but they're not floats. You do that using Flexbox. And then for Chapter 10, you're going to do a very similar type of thing, but you're going to do it rather using grid layout. And if you look, you go, they're almost the same. Yeah, because typically anything you do with one, you can do with the other. All right? Now, next week when you come in here, let's not have a test on Monday, all right? So Tuesday, what we'll do is we will, Tuesday we'll take the test, the written test on Chapter 9. Wednesday, the written test on Chapter 10. Tuesday, I'll lecture on Chapter 11. Wednesday, I'll lecture on Chapter 12. You clear on that? Monday of next week, let's make it lab. Try to get ahead. All right? Thursday will probably also be a lab. We'll see how it goes. I don't want to go too far into the future. Does all that make sense? Questions on anything? All right? Because that's all that I had.